A whisper under the stairs, and Miss Marple listens closer. Welcome to Phantom Mystery. I am your host, Edmund Cross. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Your words bring these mysteries to life. Now, the story begins. Gossington Hall had decided to be charming. It did so as large country houses often do, by pretending it had never known a bill, a builder, or a draft. The afternoon sun sifted through the lime trees and lay with courteous flattery upon the stone steps, the polished banisters, the white marquee on the lawn, and the assembled guests of Lady Bantry's Historical Society fete. Not a fete, Lady Bantry had said all week, with that mixture of self-importance and mischief which made her dear to some and trying to others. An occasion. We are restoring the main staircase to its 18th century glory, and I will not have it reduced to trestle tables and sticky buns. There were, however, trestles and buns, very good ones, accompanied by sandwiches in precise triangles and a peppery watercress that suggested authority even in horticulture. A gentle hum of conversation ran through the place, like bees among clover. A curate explained the Jacobean newel post to a retired colonel who did not need it explained. A pair of tidy ladies from the Women's Institute sniffed approvingly at the beeswax on the panelling. And near the edge of the lawn, sitting quite contentedly with a cup of tea and a half-view of everything, Miss Jane Marple of St. Mary Mead adjusted her hat against the sun and watched the world as one might watch a pond for the faintest ripple. She had been invited by Lady Bantry. "Jane, you shall come and keep me from saying dreadful things to the county," and Miss Marple, who had known Gossington Hall through fair days and foul, had accepted with pleasure. She admired the staircase. She admired, too, the younger Mr. Archer, the architect who oversaw the restoration, for his patient manner with Lady Bantry's suggestions, which had the firmness of a command and the accuracy of a guess. At 3 o'clock precisely, Lady Bantry clapped her hands and stood upon the lower step, her pearls behaving like well-trained cavalry. "My dear people, we are about to reveal a little surprise. Mr. Archer assures me it is typical of the period, whatever that means, so do gather." There was a shuffle, a murmur, a dropping of crumbs. Guests filtered from the lawn to the cool hall where the staircase rose in a gracious sweep. The air smelled of polished oak and the faintest ghost of fresh paint. Miss Marple, who disliked crowds insofar as they pressed upon one's elbows, found herself alongside Florence Pym, the village dressmaker, whose opinions were as crisp as her seams, the vicar's wife bustling under a quiet hat, and a young woman with a notebook, Miss Iris Gray, attached to the county paper, whose eyes flicked from people to panelling and back with professional curiosity. Mr. Archer stepped forward, modest and competent. "During the works," he said, "we discovered that the 19th century panelling obscured earlier features. Among them is a small service recess, almost a cupboard, beneath the turn of the stairs. We've restored the original panel and concealed catch. Lady Bantry thought you might enjoy seeing how these houses ate their secrets." "Open it, Mr. Archer," called the colonel, who liked the notion of a hidden door immensely. Nothing better than a proper contrivance. Mr. Archer smiled and laid his palm against a particular block of carving, acanthus leaves. Miss Marple noticed the smoothness where many had touched, and one or two had leaned. There was a small click, nearly polite. A section of panelling swung inward on oiled hinges, revealing a dark, narrow space. Light pooled in cautiously. People leaned closer. A child squealed with delight. "A cave!" "Not quite, darling," murmured his mother. Inside, shelves had once been fitted. One remained, black with age. A stub of iron hook protruded. A slender trace of web trembled between wood and air. There was little else, only the compactness of a space that had held small purposes and been forgotten. "It's perfectly empty," said the vicar's wife, with faint disappointment, as though a good cupboard ought to produce a miracle. "Useful for hiding the port," said the colonel. "Or a skeleton," said Florence Pym, whose appetite for melodrama was needle-sharp, Lady Bantry, who had hoped for something more theatrical, sighed with good grace and announced lemonade on the terrace. The crowd loosened. Laughter rose again, and the hall returned to its soft echo of footsteps. Miss Marple did not at first move on. She looked not with the eyes of searchers for treasure, but as a woman who had looked into many cupboards and found, occasionally, the thing that made all the difference. She noticed 2 smears where none should be, duller patches on the freshly cleaned floorboards just inside the recess, as though something had been set down recently and taken up again. She noticed, too, a faint fragrance that did not belong to beeswax or new paint, something sweeter. Not flowers. Florence Pym wore a garden on Sundays, but closer enclosed. A powder? A sachet? Miss Marple could not at once place it, and she did not like that she could not place it. Iris Grey noticed Miss Marple noticing. "You see things, don't you?" she said pleasantly, like a young woman who had read a great deal about village detectives and wanted perhaps a paragraph. Miss Marple smiled. "Oh, my dear, at my age one sees more than one tells. It is merely a little space. But they can be so, how shall I put it, possessive of what they once held." "That sounds like a headline," said Iris. And then, thwarted by intractably ordinary wood, she laughed and moved away to catch Mr. Archer for a remark about Georgian carpentry. The lemonade proved to be very good indeed. Conversation, like bunting, fluttered in cheerful strings. Miss Marple found herself accosted by Lady Bantry, who was in spirits again. "It should have been jewels," she declared, "or a packet of letters tied with blue ribbon. I should not have objected to a small cursed idol either. Jane, aren't you disappointed?" "Not at all," said Miss Marple. "Empty things have such possibilities." She had hardly said it, when a downstairs maid came flying, white-faced and red-fingered, along the terrace. "My lady, fair smash, beg pardon, my lady, Mrs. Linton, she's fallen on the stair." For an instant the scene froze the way a photograph traps surprise. Conversation collapsed. Chairs scraped, dishes chimed. Lady Bantry went at once, surprisingly brisk for a woman whose hats were so elaborate. The Colonel followed with a soldierly instinct. The vicar's wife produced smelling salts from a handbag that could have served as a picnic hamper, and Miss Marple, whose feet knew Gossington Hall as well as they knew the lanes of St. Mary Mead, rose without haste and walked back into the house. At the foot of the stairs something glittered demandingly. A crystal tumbler lay tumbled and cracked, a scatter of lemonade dampening the polished hall and seeping toward the skirting. On the 7th step, Mrs. Linton, companion to Lady Bantry and brisk authority over household arrangements, sat in a slump, one hand to her throat, her neat grey hat skewed in indignity. Mr. Archer crouched beside her. "Don't try to move," he said, calm, steady. "Breathe slowly. Mrs. Linton managed a sound that was not speech. She was a straight-backed woman, with the sort of face that had not surrendered to happiness often. Now it was red and blotched, the eyes too wet, the breath coming in short, angry sips. The vicar's wife applied the salts. Mrs. Linton flinched and coughed. "What happened?" Lady Bantry demanded. "Just Sutton," said the maid, wringing her hands. "She had the tray, my lady, for the press. Mr. Archer, for the photograph. They wanted the glass there under the banister. Like in the painting, and then she stopped and clutched her throat, and down it went." "Choked," said the Colonel, with superstition in the word. Mrs. Linton shook her head in violent economical motions. Her lips formed a shape. Miss Marple, leaning very slightly, saw it. Not a word exactly, more the refusal of one. "No," she translated very softly. "Shall I fetch Dr. Haydock?" Lady Bantry asked, half rising to the imperative. "Please," said Mr. Archer, who had the look of a man grateful for a sensible errand. "And someone fetch water, carefully, please." It was done. After a few minutes, under coaxing and a certain tender fuss, Mrs. Linton's breath settled to a stubborn rhythm. She stood, refusing the Colonel's arm. Pride, Miss Marple thought, was as good a corset as any. "I am quite recovered," Mrs. Linton said. The words scraped out like reluctant coins. It was a spasm. "You will lie down," said Lady Bantry, with the ferocity that was simply affectionate terror wearing a hat. "Flo, take her to the blue room." Florence Pym, who would have preferred drama, accepted the steadier role and escorted Mrs. Linton away. The house, which had gulped in alarm, exhaled. People returned to their places, with the conscientious air of actors after an interruption. Miss Marple, who did not unsee things once seen, let her gaze drift back toward the open recess under the stairs. The panelling, still ajar, had a new mark, just at the inner edge of the door, a smear finer than the others of a pale residue. It might have been from plaster dust, save that the day's work was done and the cleaners had been triumphant. It might have been from flour, save that kitchens kept their messes to themselves. It might have been from something that made Mrs. Linton's throat tighten as she passed with a glass held level in a capable hand. "Lemonade on polished stairs is a wicked combination," observed the vicar's wife, bustling a cloth toward the puddle. "Yes," said Miss Marple, her voice mild, "and stairs have such a way of collecting what one never means to spill." Iris Grey reappeared at Miss Marple's shoulder, poised and bright. "I suppose," she said, "that will be our excitement for the article. Housekeeper's alarming turn at historic unveiling. We'll have to soften it. Lady Bantry likes to keep the county calm." "Companion, my dear," said Miss Marple absently. "Mrs. Linton is not the housekeeper. She governs more subtly than that." The young reporter's pencil hesitated. "You know everyone's business." "Oh, no," said Miss Marple sweetly. "I only know what people can't help showing me. In a village, one learns that nothing ever happens only once. That is why it is so instructive to watch watering cans, for instance." "Watering cans?" Iris laughed. "You're teasing me." "Not at all. One sees who will overfill and who will never fill enough." She let the girl drift away again toward quotes and names and looked down at the floorboards. The $2 patches within the recess, things set down then removed, spoke of calculation, not accident. The faint scent, powder, yes, but not the rosy sort kept in dressing tables, persisted just enough for a nose that had known pantry shelves, laundry presses, and the mad extravagances of modern chemists. From upstairs came the creak of a door and the murmur of Florence Pym's fair, firm voice. Outside, somebody struck up a cheerful melody on a portable gramophone, determinedly normal. The panel under the stairs waited, open-mouthed, like a discreet confessional unwilling to name the sin. Mr. Archer moved to close it. "If you please," Miss Marple said, and the architect turned, surprised to be addressed by the gentle old lady in the better hat. "Just for a moment more. There is something very typical here, as you say, and I should not like to miss it." "Typical," he repeated. "Oh, yes," said Miss Marple, and her eyes, kind and clear, rested on the empty space that was not altogether empty. "People always think cupboards hide other people. More often they hide our little habits." Mr. Archer, obliging, puzzled, let the panel stand open. He was called away a moment later by Lady Bantry's return with Dr. Haydock, bustling and practical, his bag swinging like a verdict. In that brief flurry, the household and the guests turned toward the stairs again. And perhaps that is why no one noticed that Polly, the youngest maid, eager, quick, a girl with bright ribbon taste, was no longer carrying a tray across the hall and no longer scurrying to please. Her absence was no more than the absence of a sparrow from a hedge. Only Miss Marple, who had catalogued the rhythm of the afternoon without appearing to, felt the tidy little gap where a girl should have flitted. She looked at the panel. She looked at the place on the floor where lemonade had reached and settled. She looked at the seventh step, where Mrs. Linton had paused and refused to fall. And she thought, with the quiet frisson that comes when pattern peers out from clutter, that the afternoon had altered its stitch. Later, 10 minutes or an hour. In such houses, time sometimes goes by in the wrong shape. Somebody would say, "Has anyone seen Polly?" And the house would look for a sparrow, as if a sparrow were easy to find. for now the sun remained charming. The music chattered. Lady Bantry had her occasion, and beneath the turn of the stairs, the little recess breathed out its faint, sweet, impossible, not quite scent, and kept, for the moment, its counsel. The first to notice Polly's absence aloud was Iris Grey, who, returning with her notebook and the satisfaction of a quote, glanced at refreshments and frowned at the lack of eager ribbons. "Where's the little one?" she asked. The vicar's wife believed she had been sent for tumblers. Florence Pym, fresh from settling Mrs. Linton, said she went through just now, but no one had seen her return. Dr. Haydock, after listening to Mrs. Linton's chest, prescribed calm as a draught. "Nothing disastrous," he told Lady Bantry, glancing at Miss Marple. "A fuss spasm. Warmth and no stairs." His bag clicked shut. Miss Marple, who had seen him unfasten Fear with humour, nodded. She watched Mr. Archer because the panelling occupied his mind, like a sum that would not balance. Archer kept looking at the recess with a craftsman's pride and apprehension, like a gardener whose border produced both roses and adders. "I should close it," he said. "In a moment," said Miss Marple. "The air is faintly perfumed. It would be a pity to trap it." The hall arranged itself around the uncertainty. A few guests drifted away. Others lingered. The colonel pointed himself at the panel. Absence ripened into disturbance. A footman reported Polly had not been in the kitchen since morning. The housekeeper insisted she was polishing the copper. She was not. "Oh, sash window," complained. People thought of trapped things. Miss Marple stepped to the panel. On the inner edge, where a pale smear lay like the ghost of a fingertip, a thread caught the light. She removed it. A short, bright strand, rose pink, of the sort used in cheap ribbons. She slipped it into her reticule. "Something amiss?" Iris asked, too casual. "One always wonders where ribbons stray," said Miss Marple. "They migrate like swallows." Archer cleared his throat. "If I close this, Lady Bantry, we shall prevent accidents." "Leave it," said Lady Bantry. "Until Polly is found, I prefer cupboards to show their consciences." Florence Pym returned briefly. "Mrs. Linton asks for her handbag from the morning room. I thought it wiser to wait." "Quite right," said Lady Bantry. "I will send it presently." In the hall the colonel gathered volunteers. The grounds were to be walked. Shrubs persuaded. The pond peered into with relief. Miss Marple did not join. She looked again at the recess and then at the staircase. The 7th step. A woman pauses when she expects to be stopped, not because of danger. Expectation makes a trap of nothing. She went to the half landing. From there she saw the scuff a heel had made, where Mrs. Linton checked herself. The mark pointed outward from the panel, not toward it. Not the panel, then, but the knowledge of it. If one carries a glass, one carries also the picture of its breaking. Pictures arrest breath. On the wall hung a small cabinet of curios. It had a faint, stale sweetness, the kind that lingers politely. Miss Marple breathed it, and was taken back to barley sugar kept in a lavendered drawer. She returned her gaze to the recess. Not certainty, an echo choosing its wall. Downstairs Archer touched the panel. "Lady Bantry—" "Close it," said Lady Bantry, suddenly weary. "If the house will sulk, it may sulk in private." When the wood returned to seamlessness, conversation dipped. Iris drifted to Miss Marple. "Do you think she's truly missing?" "I think girls like Polly are seldom missing long unless someone has mistaken them for something they are not." "A thief?" "A confidant." The searchers returned. No sparrow in the hedges. No ribbon by the lily pads. The housekeeper reported Polly's best dress hung where it ought. Her everyday apron was gone. She had not taken outdoor shoes. "Then she has not gone far," Lady Bantry said. "We shall find her under our noses." "Precisely where lost things prefer to be," Miss Marple murmured. She turned to Archer. "You measure spaces. If a girl stood within that recess and someone closed the panel, could the catch be worked from inside?" Archer looked thoughtful. "No, it's sprung. One presses the carved leaf from without. And if a girl was smaller than the space and frightened of darkness?" "She would shout," he said, and went pale. "But we left it open." "For a while," said Miss Marple. "Now it is closed." There was a pause like the moment before a teacup cracks. Lady Bantry did not faint. She acted. "Open it." Archer pressed the leaf. The panel swung. The recess was empty, save that upon the floor where the duller marks lay, a fresh crescent of moisture showed, small as a child's mouth, and in it a tiny bubble quivered and broke. Iris gasped. The Colonel cleared his throat. Miss Marple touched the wet with her handkerchief. It smelled faintly sweet. "Lemonade," Archer said. "Perhaps," said Miss Marple, who doubted lemonade left so exact a sweet-shop memory. She looked not into the recess, but at the skirting beside it, where paint met wood imperfectly. There a tiny hatch, no larger than a cat might squeeze, had been fitted and painted to match, its edge thin as the seam of a secret. "How clever," she murmured. "Old houses do not only eat their secrets, they digest them." The Colonel crouched. "Never saw that in the plans." "Nor I," said Archer, stung. "That board was flush this morning." "Then someone wanted a private convenience," Miss Marple mused. "Perhaps for letters, or for things one preferred to pass from one side of a wall to the other without the vulgarity of a corridor. It would suit a creature that fears being seen," she added. "A cat, a child, or a habit?" She straightened. "Lady Bantry, might I ask Jennings for a candle and a long wooden spoon?" Lady Bantry sent the footman. He returned with a candle in a saucer and a spoon that had lived through many soups. Miss Marple crouched and slid the spoon under the thin lip. The hatch lifted with a faint complaint. From the darkness came the same shy sweetness as from the cabinet, stronger now. "It is quite safe," Miss Marple said, and held the candle to the opening. The flame leaned inward. A narrow cavity ran behind the skirting between the stair and a service passage. Halfway along sat a small muslin sachet tied with string and dusted with a silky bloom. Beyond it the passage turned. "There is room enough," she murmured to Archer. "Room enough for a hand to take from either side." The Colonel fished the sachet toward them with soldierly care. Miss Marple did not touch it. She watched Iris's eyes widen, watched Archer's offence, watched Lady Bantry's impatience measure itself against curiosity. "It looks harmless," Florence ventured. "Scent for drawers. Lavender, perhaps." "Lavender confesses itself sooner," Miss Marple said. "This is coy." Dr. Haydock, who had reappeared, sniffed and did not look amused. "It is not lavender," he said, "nor anything I would welcome in a nursery." Miss Marple's gaze moved to the staircase and back to the empty recess. "I think," she said, "we had better find the other end of this road. One ought always to know where a habit leads." Dr. Haydock took the muslin sachet with a handkerchief and slipped it into his bag. "Best not to pass it round," he said. "It has ideas." Lady Bantry steadied herself. "We will have calm, not a circus." Miss Marple still knelt by the little cavity. The sweet, faint smell breathed at her. "This runs toward the morning room," she said. Archer, surrendering offence to curiosity, nodded. "There's a service corridor there. If there is a twin hatch, it will be along that skirting." They went at once, Lady Bantry ahead, Archer measuring, Dr. Haydock behind, the Colonel clearing a path, Iris Grey hovering, notebook ready, Florence Pym solid as starch, Miss Marple in the middle, watching faces. The morning room offered its respectability. Prince Fern, Mrs. Linton's handbag on the table. Along the skirting a seam waited. Archer opened it with his penknife. The same shy sweetness drifted out. Dust filmed the inner ledge. 2 shallow crescents showed, as if careful thumbs had steadied a parcel before drawing it through. "Hatches make privacy behave like architecture," Miss Marple said. Dr. Haydock peered in and withdrew. "Empty now." His look moved to the handbag. "Let us see Mrs. Linton." In the blue room, Mrs. Linton had recovered enough to be displeased. Her right thumb carried a pale, fine bloom. She noticed Miss Marple notice, and hid her hand under the coverlet. Lady Bantry's voice took the chair. "You had a turn on the stair. The doctor says you will live. Meanwhile, Polly cannot be found." One of the little ones is always wedged somewhere, Mrs. Linton said. Polly with the ribbons, Florence added. And the faintest flicker went through Mrs. Linton's eyelids. Ribbons are for Sundays, she said, not for trays. You paused at the 7th step, Lady Bantry persisted. The glass fell. A dizziness, Mrs. Linton said flatly. It is nothing. Sometimes dizziness arrives by invitation, Miss Marple said. Sometimes by post through a little door. She inclined her head toward the twin hatches. There is such a door near the morning room. I know every cupboard, Mrs. Linton replied. There are no such foolishnesses. How pleasant for cupboards to be known, Miss Marple murmured. Do you recall if Polly wore a rose-pink ribbon? She knows better than to look like a maypole at work, Mrs. Linton said, which was as good as yes. Then, remembering, she said, I left my bag downstairs. You shall have it, Lady Bantry said, and rose. On the landing, Iris exhaled. She is hiding something. Everyone is, Miss Marple said. Differently. If I were a scolded girl, I should choose linen. She looked toward the west stair. There is a press. Florence led them. The door had been fussed with. Inside, folded sheets. Behind them, Polly, pale and braced for blame. Florence hugged her at once. I didn't mean a bother, Polly burst out, eyes sliding to Miss Marple. It smelled nice. I thought it might be for me. I took a little bag and it made my head go funny, so I put it back. Then I heard Mrs. Linton and ran. She always knows when I'm wrong. Miss Marple saw the unequal ribbon, one end frayed, and the same pale bloom on Polly's thumb. Dr. Haydock looked at both girls' hands. Enough of this near noses, he said. I'll keep the sachet. Windows open. Something sweet and sly, Miss Marple said. You cannot carry a full glass and hold your breath without breathing. The little bag persuades you to falter. Chloroform? Iris whispered. Something cousin to it, Haydock said. Not a draught. Adrift. Archer, chastened, said, if the point was to make Mrs. Linton stumble, why not a string? Strings are boys' ideas, Miss Marple said. Women trip on expectations. If a woman rehearses a stumble, she plans to be seen not quite falling. The Colonel grunted. We have a hatch and a frightened maid and a companion who does not faint. What we lack is motive. Motives are pins, Miss Marple said. You do not think of them until you step on one. They let Polly tell it in the morning room, twice the second time slower. She had stood by the recess, touched where Mr. Archer had pressed, found the little bag under the stair, lifted it for one breath, put it back, and fled at Mrs. Linton's step. She had seen no hand at the hatch. Who knew about the catch? Miss Marple asked. Archer grimaced. The workman, Lady Bantry, Mrs. Linton, and she asked about keeping things safe during the fete. And last week she asked me whether the photographers would have a clear view of the turn, Lady Bantry said. She likes things correct. She likes control, Miss Marple said, not unkindly. Often the same picture. Iris, sketching trap-doors in her notebook, said, if a person arranged to hesitate at a step, she might be rehearsing being the victim. For what? The Colonel demanded. For something that looks better if you are the one nearly hurt, Iris said, flushing. If anyone else fell, it would be a scandal. If you falter yourself, the house becomes sympathetic. Self-importance is safety, Miss Marple said. Often successful. She turned to Polly. Has Mrs. Linton sent you by the morning room to fetch from the hall so the hall need not see you? Oh, yes, miss, Polly said. She says the house should run like feet on carpet. Then someone has practiced invisibility, Miss Marple murmured, and learned that being seen to falter is not the same as not being seen. Dr. Haydock lifted his bag. I'll sequester the mischief. Keep the panel shut and the county supplied with buns. He nodded toward Miss Marple. Thinking will proceed. Miss Marple's eyes had already gone to the handbag on the table. Without opening it, she noted, near the clasp, the faintest smear of the same pale bloom. Tidy indeed. The twin crescents in the dust inside the hatch stayed in her mind with Polly's frayed ribbon end in her reticule. Next, Lady Bantry said briskly, what do we do? Take Mrs. Linton her bag, Miss Marple said, and breathe the morning room air a little. Rooms remember who uses them. She paused at the half-landing cabinet. The sweetness lingered there, too, faint as a ghost of barley sugar. Habits travel, she said. They leave small polite notes. Polly, calmer, looked miserable. Please, my lady, I didn't mean— You are still a child and therefore improvable, Lady Bantry said, surprising everyone and herself. Wash your hands and have lemonade in the open, where it is only lemonade. To Florence, sit with her and keep her from being brave in the wrong direction. Archer asked, And the hatch? Closed, Lady Bantry said. But leave the paperweight near. Suspense folded the panel as they passed. Miss Marple weighed the handbag gently, as women do. Something shifted within. Papers, compact keys with the sound of responsibility. Character stains more surely than most liquids, she thought. If one passes parcels privately, one keeps a list. Tidy people do, and tidy people, when they drop a stitch, cannot bear to leave it be. Lists betray intentions with unforgiving tiny numerals and dates. Lady Bantry carried the handbag as if it were a small, delicate animal that might scratch, and Miss Marple walked beside her with the mild expression she wore when thinking of quicksand. In the blue room, Mrs. Linton had arranged herself as a careful composition, pale, upright, correct, a woman who had decided to be seen as convalescent rather than cornered. She reached for the bag before Lady Bantry had quite reached the bed. That little speed, that little eagerness, said more than any protestation. Miss Marple's eyes lowered to the clasp. It clicked with a sound that belonged in the morning room. Precise, habitual. Mrs. Linton's hand went at once to a small leather notebook, which she slid beneath the coverlet with a movement as smooth as a turned sheet. Dear Mrs. Linton, said Lady Bantry, too sweetly, what energy for one who had a spasm. A restorative, perhaps. I have sherry. Tea is sufficient, said Mrs. Linton, the voice scrubbed and dried. I am sorry to have disturbed the household. Dr. Haydock is kind but hasty. She adjusted a cuff. The fete should continue. It is an occasion, said Lady Bantry with automatic dignity, and occasions can stand upon their own 2 feet. Her eyes followed the vanished notebook with frank curiosity. You keep lists? I admire lists. My own are never obedient. Lists are servants, Mrs. Linton said. One should not be ruled by them. Nor by steps, Miss Marple said blandly. One should choose when to pause. The faintest tightening at the corner of Mrs. Linton's mouth rewarded her. I am so glad Polly is found. Mrs. Linton showed a controlled surprise. Found? In the linen press, Lady Bantry said, and allowed a breath of scold into her tone. A frightened mouse. You will be gentle. I am always just, Mrs. Linton returned. Just is an interesting word, Miss Marple thought. It can mean kind if you are not very vulnerable, and cruel if you are. The girl must not meddle with what she does not understand. None of us must, Miss Marple agreed. Houses, for instance. They can be very instructive. Did you know there is a small hatch between the hall and the morning room? Mrs. Linton's eyes did not quite flicker. They altered in temperature. Old follies amuse architects. Indeed, said Miss Marple cheerfully. Mr. Archer was most amused. I am told such apertures were used for passing notes and similar harmlessnesses. So practical in a household that appreciates discretion. Lady Bantry, who enjoyed not understanding but being certain she would later, set down the sherry. You will rest, she commanded. If you are better by supper, come down. If not, remain elegant. She kissed the air, which Mrs. Linton did not trouble to receive. In the passage, Lady Bantry murmured, She has a look I have seen on women who hold a cat facing the wrong way. I should like to know what is in that notebook. Recipes, Miss Marple said, for people, not puddings. Iris Grey waited at the turn with the tension of a wire. Well, she catalogues, Miss Marple said. Cataloguers always leave a trail. Ask yourself who has been put in a place they do not fit. People pushed into cupboards make noise. People arranged into roles by a neat mind sometimes do not until they squeak. You think the hatch was part of a performance? Iris whispered. I think, Miss Marple said, that character sets its traps in tidy lines. If one wishes to command sympathy, one becomes nearly a victim in public. If one wishes to command servants, one keeps private doors. She looked toward the morning room. "May we sit there a moment, my dear? I find furniture conversational after a fuss." They chose the two chairs whose arms had been more often polished by anxious hands. The fern made a small, confidential rustle. Through the open window, the gramophone leaked a waltz determined to appear modern. Miss Marple's fingers considered the embroidery on the armrest and made up their mind about its owner. "Mrs. Linton has more patience than appetite," she said. "She has been steadying Lady Bantry for a long time and expects to be thanked in the correct currency." "Money?" Iris asked, writing and then frowning at her own vulgarity. "Security," Miss Marple corrected. "That money can buy, but words can buy more permanently if spoken in the right arrangement. One observes who thanks whom and with what. Lady Bantry thanks with treats and permission. Mrs. Linton thanks herself with control." Archer came to the door, took in the two women, and managed not to sigh. "I have had the men check the service passage," he said. "There are faint marks at the far end near the butler's pantry. Old, perhaps. The hatch carpentry is not mine. Someone fitted it cleverly within the last year. It irritates me." "It would irritate me in your place," Miss Marple said. "Who would have the key to the cupboards and the patience to see a little door as domestic? Not a man with drawings, a woman who knows how often tea must pass unseen." She did not look at him when she added, "Or someone taught by such a woman." Archer leaned on the doorframe with sudden weariness. "The Bantrys engaged Mrs. Linton last year, after the gardener's wife left. She has been efficient. The works have proceeded because she made them proceed. I would not have guessed subterfuge." "That is because you do things," Miss Marple said gently. "You forget to watch the places in between. Women live there." The Colonel clumped up from the lawn, hat in hand and indignation tidy. "No signs by the pond. We have instructed the hedges to produce a maid, and they refuse." "Polly is found," Lady Bantry called, enjoying contradicting despair. "Eat something, Colonel." "We are in the morning room," Miss Marple said to Iris when the others had dispersed. "Let us allow it to talk." She crossed to the writing table, not touching, only looking. On the blotter, a faint impression remained where a page had been written with a firm hand. One could, with luck and patience, coax up phrases with pencil and care. Miss Marple was not a magician and did not require magic. It was enough to see the outlines of a list, initials, dates, terse nouns. She smiled a little. "You may always count on tidy minds to indent the day." "Can we read it?" Iris breathed. "We can ask its author," Miss Marple said, "but we will be polite." She looked toward the door. "Ah." Mrs. Linton stood there, composed again, handbag closed like a sealed opinion. "Lady Bantry requests that the panel remain shut," she said. "The house is to be ordinary." "How wise," Miss Marple said. "Ordinariness is so restful. One sees better through calm water." Mrs. Linton inclined her head, a queen acknowledging a remark without accepting it. "The photographers will want the stairs. I shall have the staff polish again." She hesitated, then added with cold propriety, "Polly will be disciplined appropriately. Curiosity is a luxury for those not paid to obey." "Curiosity is the only economy that ever saved a village," Miss Marple said, so kindly that the words lost their sting and lodged as an ache. "A small word of practical housekeeping, Mrs. Linton. Muslin sachets belong in drawers. They make women drowsy. They are not for stairs." Something, not a flush, but the thought of a flush, passed through Mrs. Linton's face. "The maids put scent where they do not understand. They imitate," Miss Marple said. "We all do. Some imitate kindness, some imitate weakness, Some imitate being put upon in order to acquire the rights of the genuinely imposed upon. It works surprisingly well until someone counts the stitches. She smiled as if about a pattern for a baby's bonnet. That little leather notebook, such a comfort to a conscientious soul. One can set the day like a table. Recipes, Mrs. Linton said, with the smallest possible contempt for the naivete of the question she had not been asked. You will excuse me. When she had gone, Iris let out a long, hopeful breath. Did she understand you? She understood she was observed, Miss Marple said. That is often more instructive than a blow. By late afternoon, the fate had recovered its nerve. The gramophone marched resolutely through popular tunes. The Women's Institute had set a new standard in strawberry tarts. Polly, washed and sobered, distributed lemonade in the open air under Florence's stern eye. The panel remained closed, a virtue accomplished. Yet the house had taken on that listening quality that comes to places after a whispered alarm. Footsteps were quieter. People checked themselves before the 7th step, then laughed and pretended not to. Dr. Haydock came and went with the contained briskness of a man who has taken hold of an unknown but fairly familiar mischief and will not let it wander. Miss Marple saw Iris bent over a conversation with Archer and left them to their generational hopefulness. She went instead to the back corridor and found Jennings, the footman, polishing a bell. "You have the run of the doors," she said. "Tell me when hatches behave unusually, which hands have the knack." Jennings, loyal to the concept of discretion but human to the concept of being asked by a grandmother who smells faintly of lavender and truth, considered. "Mrs. Linton, ma'am. And sometimes Mr. Archer has desired things to be moved without the county tripping on them. I beg pardon. He is a gentleman." "He is," Miss Marple said. "Thank you." She left a coin in the small country of his palm and went to the pantry, where she sniffed without asking, and found the sweetness faint but present. The butler, a grave man with a monk's patience for glassware, raised no eyebrow when she murmured to the air, "Habits prefer to travel in straight lines where servants walk." She returned to the hall as the photographer called for a final picture. Lady Bantry on the lower step, the colonel like a planted standard, Mr. Archer personable near the banister, Mrs. Linton to one side as if the composition had gathered itself naturally. Miss Marple stood far back, the better to watch how people formed themselves when told to be still. Mrs. Linton placed a hand on the rail with deliberate grace. Her right thumb, scrubbed now, was bare of bloom, yet she glanced once, no more, toward the panel. That glance carried ownership. It also carried a question. Had her stage behaved? After the shutter clacked and people dissolved into chatter, Miss Marple moved to Lady Bantry with the little purposeful softness of a cat returning to a fireside. "My dear," she said, "would you indulge me? I should like to borrow your companion for a quarter of an hour and ask her to show me the household accounts. Old ladies love figures. They make such comforting patterns." "Go and be comforted, then," Lady Bantry said, amused. "Only do not let her rearrange my birthdays." Mrs. Linton led the way to the small office near the morning room, where neatness performed like a ballet. She unlocked a drawer and produced ledgers with modest pride. Columns marched, months behaved. Miss Marple admired as one knits a compliment. Then she asked suddenly, as if the thought had walked in uninvited, "Do you ever make little allowances to yourself for extra strain? I always think a woman who holds together an occasion ought to have her private comforts." "Comforts undermine the edges," Mrs. Linton said. "A house is an edge. If it frays, society tears." "Just so," said Miss Marple, and her eyes went for a moment to the leather notebook now beside the ledgers, brought out without remark. She let the silence breathe, then said, "How sensible to list who uses which passage at what hour, when there are workmen and guests." Mrs. Linton closed the notebook with one finger. "It prevents waste." "And prevents chance," Miss Marple said, so mildly that it might have been about a larder. Chance is untidy, yet sometimes it tells us what we have not allowed ourselves to write down. She rose. You are admirable, Mrs. Linton. The house moves as you will it. A house that does not obey is no house, Mrs. Linton returned. It is a collection. In villages, Miss Marple said, collections are called scandals. She smiled, thanked, and left, carrying with her not the contents of the notebook, which she had not seen, but its weight in the hand and the set of the mouth that owned it. On the terrace the light had gone to honey. Miss Marple found Iris and said, Presently, my dear, you will see a small correction. Iris's pencil trembled. There will be no announcement, only a stitch drawn back and put through properly. It is a woman's work. We shall stand near the hall. How will we know? Iris asked. When the person who has rehearsed nearly falling decides to finish the scene, Miss Marple said. People cannot bear incomplete patterns. If one has arranged to be seen, one must be seen again, more perfectly. She touched the girl's sleeve. Watch the 7th step. The house resumed its ceremony of being ordinary, though ordinary now had the tightness of a drum. The gramophone's cheer grew thin. Bees fussed without conviction. Drays crossed thresholds like errands under examination. Miss Marple stood with Iris at the end of the hall, where terrace light lapped the stone. Her gloved hand rested on a chair back. When? Iris whispered. When the room breathes in, Miss Marple said. People who arrange scenes choose a silence for their line. They had not long to wait. The photographer, brisk and courteous, came for one last interior shot, desiring the staircase with the polite greed of his trade. Lady Bantry agreed. Guests formed obediently. Jennings set a lamp on a coal scuttle, and Mrs. Linton appeared with the calm of something measured and approved. Miss Marple watched her right hand and then her left. The thumb that had worn the pale bloom was scrubbed to dutiful plainness, but plainness in tidy women is often a uniform. Mrs. Linton spoke to Polly, who stood with a tray, and the girl's eyes slid at once to the 7th step as a rabbit's to a snare. Hold the glass there, Mrs. Linton said, arranging a photograph more than a scene, and smoothed Lady Bantry's scarf. The photographer called for stillness. A breathless minute drew itself thin. Now, Miss Marple murmured. What followed was small and therefore enormous. Mrs. Linton's bare thumb travelled the underside of the banister near the 7th step, a touch no larger than a signature, and drew back. At once a sweetness rose, timid and sly. Polly swayed. Her tray chimed. The glass winked toward calamity. Miss Marple moved faster than her years admitted. She took the tray neatly and passed it to the Colonel, whose reflex made him step onto the 6th stair, presenting his broad back as a newel. Dr. Haydock, loitering with Archer, because Miss Marple had told him without telling him, pressed a folded handkerchief to the curve of the rail and held it as a gardener dams a trickle. Forgive us, Miss Marple said to the photographer. Old ladies have fancies about polished wood. Please proceed. Mrs. Linton's face had the calm of a winter pond. Only her eyes in one unguarded second flicked toward the panel, as one glances at a complicit servant. The shutter clicked. People unfolded. Florence steadied Polly. The Colonel surrendered the glass gravely. Dr. Haydock drifted past Mrs. Linton with a courteous nod. Your staff is steady under trial, he said. Many houses would have had splinters and hysteria. Competence is a duty, Mrs. Linton returned. Miss Marple addressed Lady Bantry. Indulge me once more. I should like to show you a domestic curiosity. Lady Bantry, who knew Miss Marple's weather, complied. They moved to the half-landing where the cabinet of curios hung like a tidy memory. Archer, Iris, Florence, the Colonel, and at a decent distance Mrs. Linton came on a thread. I think one of your charming bottles is not itself, Miss Marple said. May we take it down? Lady Bantry was game. The door opened on trifles. An ivory corkscrew, a miniature smelling bottle, a scrap of ribbon. The bottle in question, cut glass and delicate, lay like a sigh. Empty, except for the stopper whose groove was wrapped with a wisp of muslin. When warmed by a fingertip, the same coy sweetness rose. "Florence," Miss Marple said, "hold this. Mr. Archer, your knife." With a light, practical touch, she slit the muslin. A minute cache of silky powder dusted the groove, fine as flour, faintly persuasive. "Kept so," she said. "It alarms no one. With a damp thumb, one could smear a trifle on a rail." "Or along a glass," Dr. Haydock added. "Whatever it has names in pharmacopoeias and in households. Not illegal, merely impolite." "It is absurd to suggest," Mrs. Linton said from the threshold, "that anyone would dust scent upon a banister." "It would be absurd," Miss Marple agreed, "if it were scent. Lavender never yet made a maid sway. But there are other small hushes, used by nurses to quiet fretful patients, or by careful women who wish a room to hush without calling for silence. Only cleverness is like starch. Too much and the fabric cracks. "Do you accuse me?" Mrs. Linton asked. "I never accuse," Miss Marple said. "I observe you rehearsed a stumble and disliked the result. I observe a little door for private parcels, and indentations on the blotter showing times and paths. I observe you need to be necessary and have long been so, which is hard to keep once a house runs of itself." Lady Bantry made a small, honest sound. "Mrs. Linton, surely nothing has happened," Mrs. Linton said. "A silly maid, a hovering doctor, a staircase that behaved. You cannot condemn arrangement. Nothing happened because someone prevented it," Dr. Haydock said dryly. "The sachet I hold and whatever sits in that bottle will satisfy curiosity." It was not anger that altered Mrs. Linton's face, but fatigue. Her shoulders settled as if she had put down a weight she had not known was heavy. "I desired order," she said. "Gratitude evaporates unless poured into a vessel. I thought to provide the vessel." "And you placed it on the 7th step," Miss Marple said. A brief line of humour touched Mrs. Linton's mouth. "You have the figure, yes, a small alarm. No harm, a flutter. Sympathy learns its place. Afterwards the house is easier, and once sympathy sits," Iris said, half fascinated, "it hates to get up." Mrs. Linton looked at the girl properly for the first time. "Youth praises chaos and ends with schedules," she said. Then to Lady Bantry, "I have not stolen nor poisoned nor lied except by arrangement. If that does not suit you, madam, I will leave." Lady Bantry could be magnificent or shrewd, and sometimes both. She drew herself up, and then chose the smaller, better thing. "You will not leave tonight," she said. "You will dine. Tomorrow you will either stay and be indispensable without theatricals, or you will go with 2 months' wages, and a reference that tells the truth kindly. But today is my occasion, and I refuse to have it spoiled either by criminals or by virtue." "That is very Lady Bantry," Miss Marple said. The house, relieved by decision, made one of those domestic noises, an unoccupied chair easing. People drifted lawnward. The gramophone's jauntiness grew sincere, yet Miss Marple did not exhale. Something had been explained, not answered. She stood with Dr. Haydock by the panel and looked at the tiny hatch. "We have a line," she said, "but not the parcel. What travelled here besides powder?" "Nothing we can see," he said. "Then something we can count," Miss Marple replied. "People who like arrangements like collections." The little bottle was once filled. "From where?" Archer, pulled back by curiosity and a wish not to be a fool in his own house, answered. "The joinery runs true to the old steward's room," he said. "There's another cabinet there, fitted during the works." "Then," Miss Marple said with mild cheerfulness, "let us see what private drawers have been instructing the staircase in obedience." They went by the back passage, where the heir always remembered bread and beeswax. The steward's room had been prettied in the Restoration, but its bones remained practical. Low windows, a broad table with a scar where a ledger corner had misbehaved for years, and along the inner wall a run of cupboards newly faced to look older than they were. Mr. Archer, half abashed, half proud, put a hand to the rightmost door. "We refitted this," he said. "The old timber gave the measure." "Old timber tells the truth if you let it," Miss Marple said. "It creaks when you pretend." Archer opened the door upon shelves and a small cabinet, set into the thickness of the wall, twins to the half-landing's curiosity case. This one had no glass, only a neat wooden front with a brass turn. He worked it and stood back. Inside 3 shallow drawers, and behind them a thin, dark square where wood had been removed and cleverly replaced, a panel no bigger than a dinner plate, with a lip along which dust had lately sulked and been disturbed. "Your Hatch's other face," Dr. Haydock murmured. Lady Bantry, who had never loved cupboards as she loved rooms, nevertheless understood domestic geography when presented with brass turns. "Someone has been busy," she said. Not displeased to be the subject of a plot, Miss Marple did not rush. She looked at the dust as a housekeeper looks at a dresser on a Monday. 2 parallel clean marks, as if a small box had been slid through and steadied. A little crescent where a finger had tipped something up. In the corner, caught and forgotten by the broom of habit, a short grey hair curled like a punctuation mark. She pinched it gently. Coarser than a woman's, softer than a horse's, it had that faint grease that clings to brushes and to coats worn for yard errands. Jennings polishes bells, she thought, but a butler polishes silence. A hair does not accuse, it merely points. Archer slid the thin panel aside. The cavity beyond answered with a breath that had no scent, only the temperature of a place that keeps itself. He drew out a small, new-looking wooden tray. Its velvet was marked, a rectangle no larger than a cigarette case, a circle the size of a coin box, an oval that might have cushioned a miniature portrait. All 3 impressions were empty. He drew out, too, an envelope that had been pushed carelessly flat against the back. Lady Bantry's name was written on it, in an unremarkable hand, the sort of hand that resists being remembered. "Open it, please," Lady Bantry said, with the courage of a woman whose curiosity had given her most of her mistakes. Archer broke the seal. Inside lay a folded list, copied without flourish. Miss Marple saw at once that it was not a theft's shopping list. It was an inventory. Dates and items and small notes in parentheses. Brooch garnets, clasp week, repair sent. Miniature L. Bantry, age 19, oval ivory, cracked. Case, gunmetal. Initials VB, empty. The dates lay like stepping stones. Recent, a month ago, a fortnight, 3 days. Beside today's date, nothing, only a dash. Lady Bantry peered. "These are things from my green drawer," she said slowly. "I meant to have the clasp seen to, and the miniatures sent to be mended. I mentioned it to Mrs. Linton. She is efficient. Efficient minds write down what they cannot trust others to remember," Miss Marple said. "But an envelope left to be found is not efficient. It is theatrical." Dr. Haydock looked at Archer. "Your Hatch has carried trinkets?" Archer shook his head, offended, and then, with honesty, uncertain, "I cannot answer for a month. We boarded and unboarded. The men used this room. The house used it when we were not looking." Florence Pym, who had come in with Polly to stand just inside the sill, spoke with most unusual softness. "Some houses get used to 2 mistress hands, one to show and one to keep. They quarrel without saying a word." Polly clutched her tray as if it might absolve her. "I never saw no jewels," she whispered. "Only the little bag." "Of course," Miss Marple said kindly. "Children carry air for other people." She bent to the shallow drawers. The top held labels, blank and hopeful. The second, a slender spool of pink thread of precisely the shade now in her reticule, and a newer muslin square cut to bottleneck size. The third, empty but for a tiny crumb of sealing wax and a faint almond ghost, so faint that she was not certain, and in any case, certainty would have been useless without kindness. Bitter notes cling, she thought, even when nothing murderous has occurred. One is always glad when they turn out to be no more than the memory of a kitchen. Archer examined the panel frame. "This lip is rubbed smooth," he said, almost admiring. "Someone practiced until it did not stick." "Practice belongs to rehearsals," Miss Marple said, without looking at Mrs. Linton, who stood with dignity and watched her own future like a good needle watching the cloth move without complaint. But what were we rehearsing if not sympathy? And why pass trinkets? Who needs a private path for mending? Lady Bantry, whose temper could be useful when it put its gloves on, answered herself. Because if you send my miniature through the front door, the county gossips will know my age by the crack in it. If you send it through a mouse hole, you may send other things with it, and no one asks. She looked at Mrs. Linton. Did you make my house into a post office? I made it into a house again, Mrs. Linton said, not insolent, not apologetic. Things went from where they should not be to where they ought. An admirable definition of theft, the Colonel remarked, arriving at the door like a punctuation mark the house had called for. Move property from here to there and behold order. No one says stolen, Miss Marple said gently. We say moved. We ask why. Tidy people do not steal. They reclassify. She turned the envelope over. On the flap, impressed faintly into the paper, were the ghosts of earlier foldings. It had been used before to carry a different list. The maker disliked waste. On the table a ledger lay open on the wrong week, as if someone had consulted it and put it back with a mind elsewhere. She did not touch it. She looked instead at the chair. On its seat a single pin lay, bent bravely. Pins tell stories when they are bent. They have met resistance and argued and won. Someone has been mending, she said aloud, for Iris's benefit as much as her own. Not garments, arrangements. She felt the room offer up, very slightly, the shape of a pattern. A woman with a notebook who counted passages. A second, quieter mind who disliked notebooks, but loved the idea of being indispensable. A craftsman who, having made a neat path, resented its being used for something other than his own neatness. And then, like a light seen when one looks sideways, she saw that the neat list in the envelope was not Mrs. Linton's hand at all. Mrs. Linton's figures had a soldier's posture. These had a clerk's modest slouch. Archer, she said mildly. Who else writes lists here? Archer looked blank and then, being honest, resigned. I keep sight notes, he said, but I do not inventory jewels. Workmen? The Colonel suggested. They print like tombstones, Archer said. This is feminine. Then perhaps the butler's niece who helps on Thursdays, Florence murmured. She writes a pretty hand. Lady Bantry made a face. Pretty hands must stay out of my drawers. We will ask them prettily and ruin their day. I suppose, she added ruefully to Miss Marple, that this is where you say not yet. Not yet, Miss Marple agreed. We have seen the path, and we have a list that claims to be helpful while also being a shield. Helpful lists that look like shields usually belong to those who love to be seen as useful, without being looked at too closely. She looked at Mrs. Linton, not accusing, not absolving. It may be you. It may be your reflection in some other tidy soul. The habit matters more than the hand. Dr. Haydock closed the cabinet with professional fatalism. We have enough to prevent mischief, he said. If there is a nastier powder in these walls than the one I have, it will come out to be noticed. Nasty things do. Meanwhile, eat the buns. They filed back into the hall where the waltz had started again with renewed self-respect. Miss Marple paused beside the panel, as one might pause beside a friend who has said something unwisely in company. She put a gloved finger to the carved leaf, not to open, only to feel the warmth left by the day's hands. Houses catch habits, she thought, and then they teach them. Iris walked with her, eyes bright, pencil behaving itself. You think someone besides Mrs. Linton used the hatch today? I think the envelope wished to be seen and the bottle wished not, Miss Marple said. That is two wishes. Wishes seldom live in one person peacefully. She looked toward the terrace, where Lady Bantry was arranging the sunset to her satisfaction. Also, my dear, there is a thing one learns in villages. When a woman has been scolded by fate, she picks up a pin and makes straight what she can reach. Mrs. Linton scolds fate. But there is a second set of fingers here, impatient and a little romantic. They tie pink thread to parcels, is Polly? Iris whispered, appalled and loyal. Polly ties bows to feelings, not to crimes, Miss Marple said. This thread ties itself to secrecy. It thinks secrecy pretty. They had come to the half landing again. Miss Marple halted. The cabinet's door, which had been shut, showed the merest crack. The glass shone with a new thumbprint. It was not the print of a hand scrubbed conscientious as Mrs. Linton's, nor the blunt print of a workman. It was the small, clean oval of someone who had just washed for tea and could not resist seeing if the bottle still breathed when touched. Miss Marple did not open it. She smiled very slightly and went down. "Another scene will wish to be played," she told Iris. "Not the same as the last. That would be dull. A bolder one. People who like secrets tire quickly of being only useful. They wish to be important. And how does importance show itself?" Iris asked. "By accident generally," Miss Marple said, "or by accident's cousin, which is an intention that has not been taught its manners." She glanced to the garden, where the Colonel had cornered Archer into a discussion that involved fingers and indignation. In the opposite direction, Florence Pym sat with Polly, giving lemonade to Sense. Between those poles of practicality, the house held its breath like a child who will soon decide whether to cry or laugh. Twilight settled into the woodwork. The seventh step, innocent as furniture, waited. The panel waited with it. Down the corridor the steward's room kept its tidy dark, and in that dark, Miss Marple imagined, a small person's conscience was beginning to buzz at a pitch youth cannot bear for long. Somewhere a door clicked with the decisive softness of a choice made. Miss Marple felt it in the way a gardener feels rain before it reaches the roses. She drew Iris gently toward the hall. "We will stand here," she said. "We will let the house bring us what it has taught itself to do." The house obliged them by pausing. It was the kind of pause Miss Marple had described, a room breathing in. Conversation on the terrace thinned as if a lid had been set on a pot. Trays changed hands with quieter clinks. Somewhere a chair considered whether to creak and decided against it. Iris felt the hush and tightened her pencil against her palm as though quiet might blow it away. Miss Marple stood with her mild, useful stillness that makes other people betray motion. There was nothing to see, and then there was a very small thing indeed. Along the skirting beneath the turn of the stairs, the painted lip of the little hatch trembled, as if a mouse had disagreed with it. Iris's glance flew to Miss Marple. Miss Marple did not nod, but her eyes, which were always kind and therefore frequently obeyed, told the girl to attend and not to pounce. The lip moved again, an inch, then two, and a strip of paper nosed through and lay there like a tongue taking courage. No one in the hall looked down. They had been persuaded by the business of being ordinary. Miss Marple put out the tip of her umbrella and held the paper gently against the world. It was not an envelope this time, but a narrow twist of brown, folded around something angular and bound, there was Miss Marple's confirmation, by a tie of rose-pink thread. Iris's breath to her left was almost a syllable. A third inch followed. The paper would have slid farther if Miss Marple had invited it. She did not. She very slightly tapped the skirting with her umbrella, as one knocks on a door that already knows who is there. From within came that tiny, guilty scrape of a stilled hand. "Do pass it properly," Miss Marple said, so softly and kindly that the words were not heard by anyone not meant to, least of all by the staircase. "We are very calm out here." There was the barest sigh, and the parcel came obediently into the light. Miss Marple lifted it as if it were a bird and unwound the thread, which she kept. Inside lay a small gunmetal case with initials neatly scratched upon the lid. V. B. It was not handsome, but it had the look of cherished utility. The metal had been rubbed by a thumb for years, and had learned the thumb's habits. Iris might have exclaimed if Miss Marple had not given her that look which turns words into extra thoughts. Miss Marple opened the case. It held no cigarettes, as one might expect from a gentleman's pocket, but a little mirror clouded by time, a shallow compartment, and under the mirror a slit with 2 visiting cards tucked into it. The name was modestly engraved, Violet Bentz. Beneath in pencil 3 brief appointments, the earliest 20 years old. the latest a hand that refused to admit it belonged to last spring. There was also a folded browned tram ticket from a seaside town, and between card and mirror the flattest, bravest pressed violet. Iris looked from the initials to the woman who had stood so composed beneath the half-landing cabinet and said recipes. "Mrs. Linton," she whispered. "Before she married," Miss Marple murmured. She had made that guess when the Colonel had blustered at initials earlier, and everyone had let it be a joke. Bent suits a girl who learned to be brisk. Some names become verbs when you grow into them. She closed the case. "Thank you," she said to the hatch, as though it had offered them a spoon, and then, without looking at the skirting, added gently, "And now you must come out, my dear." Hiding is a bad habit to teach houses. The silence wavered and broke. A small, neat hand pushed the hatch wider, and a small, neat person slid along the dark behind the skirting and came into the steward's passage like a thought that had got itself caught and surrendered to being spoken. She was not Polly. She was a year older, perhaps, with that middle village prettiness that believes in ironed collars and clean nails, and her guilt had taken the form of tidiness rather than tears. Miss Marple recognized her with a nod one gives, to a face seen 3 times across a fortnight, carrying a parcel too carefully. "Good afternoon, Minnie," she said. Minnie swallowed as if her name had edges. "Good afternoon, miss." She darted an apologetic glance toward the pantry end, where the shadow of the butler's realm lay. "Please, I wasn't stealing. It wasn't ever that. Mr. Parlow lets me help Thursdays and sometimes Saturdays when there's a doing. I write a fair hand. Mrs. Linton said I could make proper lists for the mending so as not to trouble her ladyship with scraps, and Mr. Archer said the hatch was only a convenience till the footman had learned the new ways. So I did it proper. I tied things so as to know which were which." She saw the pink thread in Miss Marple's hand and coloured. "I like tidy. Pink looks cheerful." Miss Marple's kindness never excused nor excoriated. It made truth easy to say. "And this?" Minnie clasped her fingers and unclasped them the way small girls do when they must confess in front of the good vicar. "Mrs. Linton asked me to fetch that back," she said very straight. 2 days ago. She said it was private old rubbish that oughtn't to be in her ladyship's drawer by mistake, and if the men saw a thing with initials, they'd have their laugh. She said I was to bring it today when the house was full, and nobody looking at corners because the front parts would be for show. She said it poor-like, and I thought, well, you do think. She is always right with us, so I was glad to oblige. "And who told you to pass it now?" Miss Marple asked, as one might ask whether the kettle had boiled. "Not Mrs. Linton. She was being still for a photograph." Minnie dropped her eyes. "No, miss." She hesitated as loyalties rearranged themselves in a small pink mind that had thought secrecy pretty. Mr. Archer said after tea the corridor would be clear, and he'd see that Mr. Parlow was in the cellar over the port. He said I should never get scolded if I used the door and not the steps. "But I only meant to give and go, miss. I never—" Mr. Archer, who had come up unaware and heard his name without the benefit of introduction, made the mistake honest men sometimes make when their plans are called plans. He came forward, flushing. "I told you the hour," he said stiffly, more at Miss Marple than at Minnie. It seemed a kind thing to let a nervous girl finish an errand without walking the gauntlet of county eyes. I did not tell her what to carry. I saw a parcel and believed it stockings and combs and domestic trifles of that sort. "My business is stairs." "Your business has been people all day," Miss Marple said, not unkindly, "and you have mistaken them for stairs. It is a common masculine error. Do not let it trouble you, only let it improve you." She turned the gunmetal case in her hand, weighing not metal but consequence. "You see how one kindness makes a road for a different one. Mickey lives in halls, Minnie lives in corners. It is dangerous to sweep with a broom someone else has placed. Minnie's mouth trembled and steadied. Mrs. Linton will be ever so angry, she got out. But there was a new stubborn line to the sentence, the kind that appears when innocence resents being used rather than corrected. I thought it was for good. It may be, Miss Marple said gently. The past is not wicked because it is private, but a woman who arranges her stumble may also arrange her stories, and a woman who writes a pretty list of other people's trinkets may also like the look of her name on a case when she holds it under a lamp alone. She looked toward the blue room. We will take this to her ourselves, and we will hear what she says when she is not staging stares. Lady Bantry, who had approached and heard enough to decide without powder, drew herself up in that way she had of being both formidable and fond. Minnie, she said, you will be scolded by me and not devoured by anyone. Consider yourself withheld. Bring your uncle the butler to my morning room when I ring. Mr. Archer, you will stop arranging opportunities. Jane, do please proceed. I am having a day. They crossed the landing together. Miss Marple with the case, Iris bright and pale, Archer mortified, Minnie chastened and relieved in that complicated braid peculiar to the young who have been saved from the wrong kind of cleverness. Mrs. Linton looked up when they entered, and in that looking up lay the end of a story she had told herself. She saw the case at once and did not change colour. She had the kind of control that goes white at home and beige in public. I asked for my bag, she said. And received it, Miss Marple returned, and presently asked timid Minnie to fetch an old thing quietly, because old names are untidy when they show in new drawers. Here it is. She set the case on the table with courtesy, as one lays down an instrument before a musician who can make no sound on it now. Mrs. Linton reached but did not take. She looked at Archer, which was clever. One always looks at a man when accused by a woman, because it sets up a triangle where there had only been a line. You meddle, she told him, crisp as linen. My dear, Lady Bantry said, we all meddle. It is called living. What did you mean to do with the case? Mrs. Linton looked at Miss Marple then, which was wiser. Put it where it belonged, she said. Violet Bence had a life before Mrs. Linton had a post. Girls write cards and keep tickets and think they are history. I meant to give it to Dr. Haydock to burn for me with his notes. He is discreet. Dr. Haydock, present by the old trick of doctors to be always exactly where someone wishes them to be compromisingly, lifted his brows. I burn only prescriptions and sometimes reputations when they deserve it, he said. Why would you burn a mirror and your maiden name? Because, Mrs. Linton said, and there was finally a catch in the voice that was not rehearsed, it is expensive to be indispensable and cheap to be ridiculous. When one is Violet, girls have fewer mistakes forgiven. Mrs. Linton is obeyed. Miss Marple's pity was never flustered. She dispensed it in teaspoons, not ladles. One may keep both, she said quietly, if one stops trying to feed other people with them. She slid the case back to Mrs. Linton. There is no crime in sentiment. There is danger in engineering sympathy. The house knows now. Houses always do. It will not perform so readily next time. Mrs. Linton accepted her own initials with a hand that had lost certainty, and with it, oddly, had found some gentleness. You will dismiss me, she said to Lady Bantry, as if rehearsing a line and hearing how it sounded in a new play. I will not, said Lady Bantry, surprising herself again. I will require you to stop being theatrical. I will also require you to tell me tonight all the things you have sent through mouse holes that should have gone by doors. We shall mend like decent women. And if you like Violet, you may call yourself Violet when we have both had a drink. There was a little silence then, that did more to right the house than all the beeswax. Archer breathed as a man does who has been blamed correctly, and feels improved by it. Minnie put a knuckle to her eye and took it away without drama. Iris wrote nothing, because she understood that some sentences are for remembering, not for printing. Miss Marple, who disliked untied ends, glanced once more at the seventh step and at the panel. There will be another moment, she thought, but this one had performed its duty. She inclined her head to Mrs. Linton, Violet then, and to the room. "We have nearly done with practice," she said, as if about a choir. "Now we shall see whether anyone was listening to the hymn." Dusk softened the edges of Gossington Hall, and the Fates' voices sank to that comfortable murmur houses learn to hum after tea. Lady Bantry declared that nothing further would be allowed to happen until supper, which is the sort of declaration that tempts happenings. Miss Marple, who believed in kindness and small experiments, asked Jennings for a very dull piece of brown paper, a pencil that marked more than it wrote, and a bit of string. She borrowed from Florence Pym a scrap of rosy thread to please an old lady's eye, and received it cheerfully, for Florence liked to remain useful where feeling was concerned. In the morning room, with Dr. Haydock watching, as if she were performing surgery on mischief, Miss Marple wrapped nothing in the paper, tied it with the thread, and dusted the knot with the pencil's soft graphite. "Not poison," Dr. Haydock remarked. "No," said Miss Marple mildly. "Recognition. Coal dust for the drawing-room." Archer, chastened into willingness, repaired a squeak in the little hatch so that it would open without calling witnesses. Minnie, newly under Lady Bantry's wing and therefore steadied, was told plainly she would carry nothing more than lemonade until someone older than her secret said otherwise. Violet Linton, settled now into the dignity of one who has been forgiven on conditions, sat very upright in the blue room and did not send anyone anywhere. The house adjusted itself to these new stitches with surprising ease. It is astonishing how quickly a place obeys once it has been shown where its disobediences live. Miss Marple placed the brown paper parcel just inside the hatch on the steward's room side and left the panel flush. "There is nothing inside it," Iris whispered, delighted and scandalized. "Emptiness is very tempting to the sort of person who likes contents," Miss Marple said. She put the pencil-smudged knot where a neat hand would pinch it. "We shall stand quite stupidly in the hall and think of buns." They did so. The gramophone found a foxtrot. The last of the county admired Lady Bantry's roses by twilight. Jennings took lamps round in that dignified promenade servants have when carrying flame. The panel under the stairs, so ordinary now it was theatrical again, did not stir. Miss Marple made a small conversation about tomatoes to Iris, and praised the Colonel's sense of strategy in the matter of chairs. Then, as the first stars denounced the afternoon's fuss, the lip of the hatch, very obedient and very polite, moved inward. Miss Marple did not look. Her hands, which had done plain knitting for half a century, knew how to be the sort that never fumbles. She shifted a little to give the shadow room. A narrow, practised hand, gloved, not with housework, but with the thin glove women wear when they prefer not to be noticed, came through, pinched the knot, which took the graphite perfectly, and withdrew parcel and hand in one unison of stealth, the hatch shut with a breath. Iris's eyes asked questions her mouth knew better than to shape. Miss Marple said something about the price of eggs that made a small laugh sound not like a signal, but like a comfort. Archer and the Colonel took the terrace casually. Dr. Haydock chose to admire a fern near the steward's passage. Jennings, consulted to the point of complicity, moved toward the cellar as decoys do. Miss Marple and Iris, not hurrying, turned down the quiet corridor where the steward's room kept its practical dark. The door was on the chain. That in a house where doors prefer to be shut or open, but not persuaded to behave like secrets, was eloquent. "Gently," Miss Marple said, and tapped twice with her umbrella. "It will be me, my dear. People who mean well and are foolish should not be left alone with both at once." There was the smallest pause, then the chain slid. Florence Pym stood just inside, her neat face paler than starch allows. In one hand she held the brown paper parcel. The knot wore a fingerprint of silvery grey as clear as a signature. Her other hand, gloveless now, had a faint dusting to match. She looked at Miss Marple with that stubborn honesty village women wear when they know they have done wrong, for a reason they still believe is right. "I mended things, Miss Marple," she said, before anyone could ask. I always have. People bring me what won't lie flat in their lives, and I sew it in where it will not rub. Mrs. Linton, Violet asked me twice last month to let a letter travel without the post, and before that certain ladies, names I will not say because I still have to make their skirts hang as they ought, asked me to get back what they had wrongly sent or what had been wrongly kept. The hatch saved me steps and saved them shame. I thought that was mercy. Miss Marple glanced once at the parcel and back. Mercy often borrows other people's cupboards, she said. This tonight? Florence's mouth tightened. A letter came back to me to pass along. The last of a silly lot written years ago by a girl with more hair than sense. You will not make me say whose. It was to go to Violet. I would have put it into her own hands. Only, she glanced toward the wall cabinet and then down, and the glance was a confession. Only I looked just now. I should not. I did. Her chin lifted. It was empty. Empty. Iris echoed. Quite, Florence said. The little tray that used to have impressions has had new impressions and then none. Someone has been before me. She held the parcel out with contempt for her own temptation. I took this to show how easily we go wrong when we think our fingers know better than doors. Miss Marple accepted the parcel and placed it on the table. And who asked you tonight? Florence drew her breath. Archer told me the hour would be easy. He is a good man and a bad conspirator. The ask was left in the morning room. In Mrs. Linton's hand, I thought. The last of them, please. But it was not her hand, after all, not quite. I see women's hands, I have to. The tales of the wise were wrong, and the habit of the T's came from a typewriter, I'd say. Copied, not grown. Pretty hands stay out of my drawers, Lady Bantry had said. Miss Marple remembered the envelope list. Feminine, but not Violet's soldierly neatness. Minnie? She asked softly. Florence shook her head at once. No, the girl prints when nervous. This was someone who copies for a living and thinks a list is a picture. Iris flushed and then flushed again at her own flush, appalled. Not me, she said quickly. I copy headlines. I don't forge the county. Of course not, my dear, Miss Marple said, serene. But you know who does sometimes at the paper, the one who makes up the society column from whispers. The hand that believes flourishes are vulgar and writes as if tidying crumbs. Iris considered, troubled. Mr. Reeve sets the type. He has ink fingers and a wife who keeps him in line. I can ask about a hand, not a name. We will not borrow their ink just yet, Miss Marple said. Our ink is here. She touched the grey smudge on Florence's finger. It blurred slightly. And there, she added, for the steward's room door, at knob height. Bore a whisper of graphite, too, so faint it would have been nothing if there had not been something to see with it. They went to the cabinet. Archer, summoned by the gravity that attaches to women looking at woodwork, opened the shallow drawers. Empty, as Florence had said. The thin panel slid back to reveal the cavity. It, too, had been wiped of its intimate dust. Only a narrow curl of paper had caught where wood resists cloth. Miss Marple teased it out with the patience of a woman removing a sliver. It was the lower third of a page, torn cleanly across the edge like a horizon. 3 words survived in that clerkish, modest hand, forgiven if returned. Below a date last week, the signature gone with the rest. Forgiven, Dr. Haydock repeated. A rare word in county documents. A word with a hook, Miss Marple said. Forgiveness that must be asked for in the right form is very like a bill. She turned to Florence. Whose mistakes have you mended long enough to know by touch? Florence's eyes moved in one quick circuit. Lady Bantry, Violet, Archer, Iris, past the door where Jennings hovered as a footman hovers when the house is thinking, and beyond them to no one, which is to say to the space a person usually occupied. The Colonel, she said at last with reluctance. He forgets that buttons are not bullets, but he cannot write forgery hands. Mr. Parlow would never. Minnie wouldn't dare. Iris doesn't need to. And Violet, Florence's voice softened oddly. Violet would sooner burn her past than label it and send it through a hole. Which leaves, Iris said, struggling with the simple arithmetic of small places. No one at all. Which is absurd. Absurdities are signs, Miss Marple said. When an answer leaves no one, it hides under the person who has made themselves no one most successfully. Her gaze went to the panel and beyond it, as if the wall itself had started a sentence and would not finish it. A person who passes everywhere because they exist to smooth the passage, who is thanked with glances and never with names. "Reeve," Iris blurted, suddenly white. "Not my Reeve, Mr. Reeve at the paper, but the Reeve, as in the village hall, the clerk to the parish, Mr. Toms. He sits with pen and minutes and writes down everything no one else wants to remember, and then later he remembers it for them. He was here this afternoon to take notes for the parish notice board. Restoration at Gossington, great success. He would have hands like this because he copies hands for minutes. And he is always in a corner and in no one's way." Archer looked as if someone had removed a nail from his boot. "I saw him near the morning room," he said slowly. "He was very polite about the panelling. I told him the period and he collected the word for later. Does he know the Hatches?" Lady Bantry had not liked Mr. Toms for years without needing a reason. She preferred reasons when given one. "He knows everything that makes other people look clever." "He would not powder a banister," Violet said from the doorway, composed and for once more woman than function. "He would watch a woman powder her life." "Forgiven if returned," Miss Marple repeated, tasting the phrase. "A clerk's mercantile mercy. My dear Lady Bantry, if you would be so kind as to ask Jennings whether Mr. Toms is still in the garden congratulating your roses, and then, if he is, to offer him a glass and detain him with a question about parish benches. We shall take this opportunity to look where a clerk would hide a longer memory." "Where do clerks hide anything?" Iris asked. "In the place everyone believes empty because it looks too useful to be secret," Miss Marple said. She knelt at the recess under the stairs, which had behaved all day like a small actor eager for applause. "Mr. Archer, your spoon again, if you please. And a candle." Archer went and came. The flame fluttered into the mouth of the panel like a whisper blown back. Miss Marple slid her fingers along the inner right-hand skirting until they found a second lip that did not show itself to anyone who merely believed in one surprise per cupboard. The wood lifted. Behind the familiar cavity there was another lower running farther than politeness expects. The air there was colder, what houses keep for winter. And there, neat as filing, lay 3 tin boxes, the sort that once held biscuits and now hold things far less cheerful. She drew the first into the candlelight. "Its label written in that same clerkly hand," said quite simply, assorted to be returned when asked properly. Inside were ribbons, cards, a brooch whose garnet clasp truly needed mending, a lock of hair old enough to be embarrassing, and 6 letters tied, yes, with pink thread. The second box was marked "Paid, Forgiven," and was flatter. The third, locked, wore no label at all. "Archer," Miss Marple said, "do humour me." He did. His knife was neat and reluctant, but the lock was cheaper than the biscuit tin was proud. Within lay a list, longer, colder, patient, names, dates, lent, owed and returned, and another column with a figure that was not money but weight, as if guilt could be measured by ounces. At the bottom, in the same hand that insisted on forgiveness as a condition, a final line freshly begun, "VB, case, promised tonight." Violet made no sound. Miss Marple closed the lid with the silence one gives to a prayer begun in the wrong church and finished in the right. "There is your longer memory," she said. "A parish mind that tidies people into what they owe, then keeps the receipts. And if someone refused to pay in the right manner—" Dr. Haydock's voice was very quiet. "Then the stare performs," Miss Marple said. "Not to kill, too noisy for a clerk, but to frighten, to make the ask properly sound like gratitude instead of ransom." Only Violet caught her breath and did not fall, which made the play fail. And a failed play invites a second performance. Lady Bantry returned with the news that Mr. Toms had admired the roses accepted sherry, and gone to fetch his bicycle, because the evening air becomes damp when one keeps minutes. She looked at the tins, not angrily, but with the special contempt of women for officious small men. "No one blackmails me with my own garnets," she said. "I merely forget to fasten them, Jane." "Presently," Miss Marple said, and her eyes, kind and flinty both, went to the hall where the seventh step waited with its new obedience. "We will not chase a clerk into the hedges in the dark. We will invite him to return what he has kept in his careful way, and if he will not, we will ask the parish to minute his reluctance. But first, we will put these tins back as if nothing were there at all. Houses tell truth better when they are allowed to lie for one more hour." They put the tins back, as if they had never been touched. The lids seated, the labels turned to their quiet faces, the lock on the third, made to look as stupidly secure as cheap locks do. Miss Marple let the inner lip fall, and before Archer slid the familiar panel home, she rubbed a breath of coal dust from the scuttle along the hidden catch. "Clerks always pinch with the same fingers," she said. "One cannot alter the way one opens things when one has opened ledgers for 20 years. Jennings, grave with delight at conspiracies that felt like housekeeping, arranged the hall lamps so that the panel's shadow lay shallow, and gave nothing away until the moment when it would be asked to say everything. Now we must give the parish an opportunity to be conscientious," Lady Bantry said, with that battle light in her eyes that was almost girlish. She sent Jennings down the drive to the little gate where Mr. Toms had last been seen with his bicycle, and dispatched a note after him, not in any prettied hand, but in her own candid scribble. "You have misspelled Bannister once. Come put it right. Also names for the notice board." It was the sort of command a village clerk receives the way a bell receives a pull. It told him he was needed, and offered him the sugar of being correct in public. Violet Linton, composed now in the way of a woman who has chosen to remain, stood at the blue room threshold and watched the house distribute its people. She met Miss Marple's eye and came a step nearer. "I don't ask forgiveness," she said quietly, "and I do not sell it. I asked order. I will ask it better. But the man who weighs sins by ounces will be invited to weigh his own," Miss Marple said. "It is not always pleasant to be necessary. When one has been, one starts to charge too much." They stood a moment, two tidy women with different histories, and the same knowledge of pins and their uses. And then the hall made that small shift of attention, which means a door has opened to someone who thinks doors open naturally to him. Mr. Toms came in with the apologetic importance of a mild man on an errand. He had bicycle clips, and his jacket had the sheen of cloth long brushed toward virtue. His fingers, ink-proud, were clean at the nails. He had that clerk's way of smiling, which says he will forgive you your disorder if you will forgive him his rules. He bowed to Lady Bantry, as if she were an entry in a minutes book that had to be right before the next item could proceed. "You are good to come back," Lady Bantry said sweetly. "There is a blot in the parish sentence where there ought to be a comma. We must decide whether to be famous for a fete or notable for an occasion. Come sit in the morning room and tidy us." She led him, and he went, drawn as any neat man is drawn to tables and pens. Iris bent over the writing tray, as if in admiration of language, and then at Jennings's soft cough, withdrew prettily, leaving space for a clerk and his tidiness to breathe. Miss Marple did not hurry. She stood where she could see both the morning-room door and the harmless wood of the panel. Violet took a chair in the blue-room doorway, her profile self-possessed as a medal. Archer went to the lower landing and looked up at the seventh step, as if even carpenters learn to distrust their banisters after a day like this. Dr. Haydock chose the fern again, with a doctor's respect for privacy. Florence Pym sat with Polly under a lamp and threaded a needle in case decency might require mending. Mr. Tom stayed 3 minutes at the writing table. They heard the small virtues of his trade, the soft correction of a letter, the smoothing of paper with the palm, the little contented breath clerks give when a line becomes obedient. Then the breath stopped, on some inaudible cue inside his head, habit perhaps, or the knowledge that a thing not yet put properly would otherwise keep him awake. He stood and looked, not toward the hall where people were, but toward the passage where no one was meant to be. He moved like a man attending to a draught. Miss Marple's eyes, kind and alert, went to the panel, and its shadow, which Jennings had arranged to be honest at last, showed the tiniest change. Mr. Tom's did not crouch. He had dignity. He bent with back straight and hand precise, found the carved leaf's cousin inside the skirting, where only someone who had opened it before would know to seek, and pinched. The panel gave exactly. The coal dust kissed exactly. He reached not blindly, but in that confident way a man does when his fingers trust the cupboard. The tins did not come forward. His hand did. He withdrew it, and pressed the hidden lip again so that his theft of memory should leave no mark of movement, and turned to return to his sentence about Gossington's success. He found Miss Marple instead. She had not moved quickly. She had moved correctly. She stood where he must look and did not look aside. Behind her, because houses sometimes decide to be witnesses, Lady Bantry, Violet, Archer, Iris, Florence, and even the Colonel assembled themselves without fuss into a line that felt like a parish meeting, except that it was not Mr. Toms's to chair. "I am so glad you have found the word," Miss Marple said pleasantly. "We were uncertain whether to call it occasion or attempt. It depends entirely upon whether things are returned before one is asked to forgive." Mr. Toms's smile did a very small and very telling thing. It stayed where it was, and only the eyes behind it pinched. "I beg your pardon, ma'am?" "Of course," Miss Marple agreed. "We all do when we have taken what was not ours. You will spare us that courtesy by going straight to the tins and bringing them out. Your fingers will obey even if you should prefer to argue with your face." He looked at his right hand, because she had told him to. The coal dust, faint but precise, sat on the pad of his thumb and the tips of first and second fingers, the clerk's pinch, the ledger hold. It was a proper smudge. It had the decency to be undeniable. For a second he considered outrage. Then he chose a different virtue, and attempted injured rectitude. "Those are parish records," he said, very careful, very slow. "Matters entrusted to me." "Entrusted by whom?" Dr. Haydock inquired. "By forgiveness with conditions, or by people who did not know they had entrusted you with their mistakes?" Mr. Toms lifted his chin. "Things not properly asked for should not be returned. It invites laxity." His gaze flicked toward Violet's face and away again. "It encourages people to believe they may have youth and dignity both, and pay no small interest." "Oh, my dear," Miss Marple said softly, and there was great weariness and great amusement together in it. "We always pay interest on youth. But we do not pay it to parish clerks. We pay it to time, and time collects without receipts. Bring out the tins." He might have refused. He might have called it an insult and walked out. But the house had arranged itself against him, and Mr. Toms was in his way a domestic creature. He did not like to put chairs at angles. He opened the panel again, smudging his ledger fingers a trifle more, and drew the tins out with the same care with which he had put them away. Habit will be beautiful even when it is wicked. He set them on the hall table. The biscuit tins looked faintly ashamed. Miss Marple lifted the lid of the labelled box, and the little museum of human caution lay courteous as before. Lady Bantry, whose patience with petty tyrants was as short as her temper with bad pastry, reached in and took her garnet brooch. "I have decided to be notorious for an occasion," she said, "and to fasten my own clasps. I will ask forgiveness of my maid if I tear my dress, and of my husband if I lose a jewel. I do not apply to clerks." Violet came forward. She did not touch the past tied with pink. She let it lie. "You weighed our small shames," she said to Mr. Toms, not unkindly, "and charged us postage. I have taken an occupation that looks like dignity, because I could not afford to be Violet Bence forever." but I can afford tonight to call you improper." She turned to Lady Bantry. "If you permit, madam, tomorrow I shall go to the parish meeting and minute his resignation myself." Mr. Toms's mouth pinched then properly. "This is persecution," he said. "I have done nothing but keep what was asked of me safe." "It is always the verb," Miss Marple observed. "Asked. Your notes say, forgiven if returned. Forgiveness is not a stamp you get to lick. And safety that makes the owners unsafe is a trick cupboard. We know where both are now." She tapped the third tin. "The list inside is yours. The tails of your I's are shy from a lifetime of copying minutes, and your T's mean to be crosses. You label by categories instead of people. You count not value but units, and you keep the last line for what is to be done after dark. That is a parish mind. It is a useful mind in its place. It is indecent in other people's drawers." He looked at Iris then, perhaps out of habit because young women so often admire an older man's rectitude. Iris did not oblige him. "You misspelled Bannister this afternoon," she said with merciless brightness. "And you put an Oxford comma where Lady Bantry would never have one. I will correct both in print." The colonel, who had not been required for courage, found himself with some left over and made a tidy throat noise. "Shall we send for the constable?" "No," Lady Bantry said crisply, before Miss Marple could speak. "The constable lives off parish goodwill and will be useless. We will send for Mr. Toms's bicycle and give him a lamp that does not belong to us. We will also send a note to the vicar that the parish requires a new clerk who spells and minds his own business. If any lady or gentleman wishes to claim a letter or a ribbon, they will come to me tomorrow and retrieve it. If any wish to confess to something more, they may do so to Dr. Haydock, who has better cupboards than Mr. Tom's. That will be the end of it." Mr. Toms's dignity had nowhere to sit. He looked around for a chair prepared for him and found none. He made a stiff bow to emptiness, and because even people who have kept too many secrets know when a house declines to keep theirs any longer, he put his coal-smudged fingers to the brim of his hat and went. Jennings, sober as a sacristan, lit him to the door. Miss Marple watched the smudge he left on the hatband and knew the story had come to its pause, not its end. Pauses in villages are much nearer to continuations than endings are. The tins sat on the table like boxes at an auction. Violet stood looking at nothing, which is sometimes the decent way to look at one's own name. Archer let his shoulders remember they belonged to a man who had made a staircase behave. Iris, bright with relief, began to imagine the least damaging sentence that would still satisfy her editor. "Tomorrow," Miss Marple said, "we shall thread back what belongs to whom. Tonight we shall keep them together in one decent place where rooms may forget them." She glanced at the 7th step, innocent as furniture again, and then at the panel. "And we shall sleep with ordinary doors." Supper at Gossington Hall arrived like a truce. Lamps steadied, voices settled, and even the staircase looked ashamed of its theatricals. Lady Bantry decreed the tins should sleep in her wardrobe, the only cupboard that has never lied to me, and Jennings bore them upstairs with a priestly air. Violet closed the blue room door on the powder bottle's ash and took her place at table without flinching. Miss Marple sat where she could see the hall's mouth and the 7th step's innocent face. Iris kept company with Archer, who had recovered his profession like a man who has found his hat after weather. Dr. Haydock presided over the soup with the benevolent tyranny of a doctor among healthy people. Conversation minded itself. The colonel proposed horsewhips for petty tyrants. Lady Bantry preferred dismissal and dullness. Violet ate like a woman deciding to prefer fuel to penance. Archer, remembering banisters and human nature, announced that tomorrow he would block the hatch and make the panel honest with screws. Houses, he said, must not be allowed ambitions. Nor people cupboards, Miss Marple added, and the table, relieved, laughed an inch or two. After apple tart, coffee recruited them to the library, a room that had grown by consent, sermons beside seed catalogues, cookery among Pliny. The tins, under stout custody, receded to anecdote. Iris, legs tucked under, hazarded, "Was it always Mr. Tom's?" "Not at first," Miss Marple said. "First there was a woman rehearsing importance, and a stare obliging. That drew a clerk who prefers commas to choices. He found a way to make gratitude arrive on time." Archer smiled ruefully. "By arranging the pause?" "Exactly," Miss Marple said. "He never pushed. He cultivated breath. When breath failed him, he built a cupboard to store it." Dr. Haydock set down his cup. "The powder would not have killed. It is the cousin of old hospital comforts. In a timid chest it steals a step. In a stubborn one it wastes itself." Violet's hands were correct and empty. "I have burnt it," she said. "There will be no second rehearsal." "Then the step will forget its lines," Miss Marple said, "and the village will discover it can forgive without a ledger." Lady Bantry, inspecting the day with satisfaction, asked what should be done with the tins tomorrow. "Put the kettle on," Miss Marple said. "Give back what is yours to those to whom it is theirs, and require no speeches. Shame sits better with tea than with terms." They agreed. Relief, a courteous guest, arranged itself among them. Archer and Iris discovered that banisters are less interesting than people. The Colonel dozed in a chair he pretended to be guarding. Florence took off her shoes and was forgiven by medicine. Minnie, promoted to water, poured like a queen learning mercy. Before bed, Miss Marple borrowed Violet for a turn about the ordinary doors. They paused by the linen press. Cloth and starch breathed decorum. "Give Polly a secret," Miss Marple said. "A very dull one, with keys and counting. It will cure her of pretty doors." "The linen," Violet said, almost smiling. "I will crown her with towels. She shall discover that inventories are not fairy tales." They returned to the library. The house yawned and prepared to be well behaved. Later, when rooms had taken their sleepers, Miss Marple sat by an open window and let the day fold itself. She thought briefly of Mr. Tom's bicycling home with his pinch-marked dignity, of Violet putting the little gunmetal case in a drawer marked mine, of Minnie sleeping through the triumph of having been told the truth in time. Having thought those things, she let them go as one shakes rain from a shawl. Morning came in on soft shoes. The Women's Institute arrived by twos to reclaim ribbons, a lock of hair, a locket. There was laughter and a few sober eyes. Lady Bantry wrote short receipts in her own robust hand, and never once asked for apologies. The vicar, relieved of a clerk, accepted Mr. Toms's note of resignation for reasons of health and delicacy, and promised the parish minutes would henceforth be plainer, which everyone knew was a blessing. By 11, the seventh step had forgotten its brief career. Children ran up it without art. Wood remembers what we teach it last. Archer, with tools and contrition, fastened the panel until it was no more interesting than a skirting board. He left one brass screw a little brighter than the rest, a confession acceptable in a craftsman. Iris, having weighed headlines against kindness, filed restoration a success. Tea praised, staircase behaved, and added with stealthy pride, villagers commend sensible arrangements. Her editor would grumble and print it. Miss Marple put on her hat. There are two departures from country houses, those with trumpets and those with punctuality. Hers were always the latter. She found Lady Bantry in the morning room writing garnet clasp repaired on a card that would remind her in a month, and be believed because the hand was hers. "Jane," said Lady Bantry, "I shall never forgive you if you do not come back and find me another crime." "Then I shall be forced to be wicked," said Miss Marple. They pressed hands like conspirators and kissed the air like ladies. On the lane, hedges glittered with a rain that had altered its mind. Iris hurried after with breath and gratitude. "I wrote you in," she said, "as a certain old lady who approved the sandwiches. I did not mention cupboards." "Do not," Miss Marple said. "Write that the village remembered people are not drawers. It will be perfectly true and entirely useful." About Archer, punctuation, Miss Marple advised. "Full stops until you are quite sure about your semicolons." They laughed, which is friendship's tidiest grammar, and the bus came in triumphantly shabby style. Miss Marple took the seat that shows one a faint reflection of one's hat and the hedges both. Gossington dwindled obligingly. She did not think of panels or tins. She thought of houses that perform when taught tricks and settle when returned to shelter, of the vanity in small officials, of the kindness in dull inventories, of how secrets behave when deprived of admiration. St. Mary Mead received her with a clock 4 minutes wrong in the right direction. She boiled the kettle and fed the roses, and put the rose-pink thread with her orderly ball of string. "A pity," she told the teapot, "that so pretty a colour should have been taught to tie secrets." Then, as always, when a story had finished doing its necessary work, she did not think about it. She drank her tea while it was hot, and let the village resume the small practical mysteries that never require a panel, only eyes that notice, and a patience that forgives without a list. Later that afternoon she walked to the high street and bought darning needles, birdseed, and a new bar of soap that promised lavender but smelt mostly of honesty. On her way back she paused to greet a cat, inspected a watering can left too full, and smiled. Villages, she knew, confessed themselves in such little overflows. Always politely, it was 2 mornings later, when the garden had finished drinking the small rain, and the newspapers had done their work of furnishing cages and lighting fires, that Lady Bantry wrote to Miss Marple, and being Lady Bantry, did not wait for a reply before arriving in person with Violet and Iris, and a paper bag that proved to be currant buns. Dr. Haydock followed an hour later to certify that a case is closed, and Archer, detained by a contrite screw, appeared after luncheon. Miss Marple, who had set out tea because she knew her village, received them with the mild delight of a woman whose parlour expects people in exactly this number. The Roses looked in and agreed. Lady Bantry did not sit until she had hugged Miss Marple twice, once for the story and once, one suspected, for the audience it had afforded her. Violet sat as Violet, not as Mrs. Linton. The difference was so slight and so large that only women noticed. Iris perched with a notebook she had not the impertinence to open. Archer stood with the good humility of a man who has discovered that stairs are opinions as well as timber. Dr. Haydock found the armchair that always understood him. "Jane," said Lady Bantry, "we have come for our sermon." "Dear Dolly," said Miss Marple, "you never listen to one in church. I should be mortified to provide the first." "Then call it a knitting pattern," Dr. Haydock said. "We want to see how the row began." Miss Marple poured and complied. It began, as these things do, with a nothing, a faint, not rosy scent in a place that had no business smelling of anything but wood and beeswax. It was coy, and coyness is a clue. Powder that wishes to be perfume does not belong on stairs. Then 2 dull marks on the floor inside the recess, where something had been set down recently and lifted, and on the panel's inner lip a pale smear, finer than plaster, too fine for flour. Those are house clues. The people clues came almost at once. Mrs. Linton's controlled collapse at the 7th step, which was no fall and no faint, only a rehearsal. And Polly's absence, which was not a disappearance but a frightened flit. Violet's mouth moved with that honest wince reserved for one's own past self. "I meant only to make the house learn sympathy," she said. "The house has since taught me economy." "Quite," said Miss Marple. "Your thumb, dear, wore the bloom a bottle leaves when muslin has been used to keep a powder from spilling in a drawer. The same sweetness breathed from the half-landing cabinet. One does not need labels if one has lived near hospital comforters and cheap chemists. Then the hatch, prettily cut, lightly used, dust with 2 crescents where parcels had been steadied. A tiny thread, rose-pink, caught in the panel's join. Polly's ribbon proved the colour's habits. Later we found the spool. The hatch told us your house had learned a second way to pass things, and houses that learn conveniences are like people who learn compliments. They cannot help using them for more than one purpose. Archer nodded, chastened and grateful. "I made the hole," he said. "I did not consider who would acquire it." You considered wood, Miss Marple said. Never apologize for that. Only add women next time. There was also the list in the envelope, useful and yet theatrical, a shield pretending to be a guide, and the hand not quite yours, Violet. Yours stands up straight. This one sloped and apologized. That told me the house had two tidy minds, one that arranges people in lines, and one that copies their lines into a book. Mr. Tom's, Iris breathed, with a young woman's horror at the betrayal of a trade she respects. He always sits in corners. Corners are excellent positions, Miss Marple said serenely. One sees more and is seen less. He had made a business of helping the village remember what it wished to forget, but only if the forgetting paid him, in the form he preferred, gratitude phrased to his liking. Your phrase on the torn note, forgiven if returned, is a clerk's morality. Forgiveness does not invoice, and when forgiveness tries to collect, it borrows tricks. The stairs' little powder was never his. It was Violet's temptation, and you, she inclined her head to Violet with kindness that did not excuse, had told the house to pause. The pause drew him. He built a cupboard out of a habit. Lady Bantry snapped a bun in two as if it were a petty official, and you trapped him with coal dust. Admirable domesticity. It was only fair, Miss Marple said. He had trapped others with house things, mouse holes and biscuit tins. Men like Mr. Tom's rarely dare noise. They prefer ledgers. So I asked a ledger to betray him. Ledger fingers pinch. The smudge showed what the village never saw. The parish had put its small shames in a clerk's pocket. Dr. Haydock stirred his tea and did not say that medicine has known such clerks, because everyone knew he did not need to. And the rest, he said. You manage by letting people return to their useful shapes. Violet became Violet and not a staircase. Archer put screws where wood will remember them. Dolly frightened the parish into decency. Iris printed what would do no harm. Minnie learned that secrets are heavy. Mr. Tom's resigned for his health. A good prescription. Archer colored, this time with something warmer than embarrassment. I am very much obliged to you, Miss Marple, for not letting me be a fool the second time. I shan't build mouse holes for other people's morals again. One rarely needs to, Miss Marple returned. People will always make their own. The trick is to prevent the house from admiring them. Iris, who had been thinking, asked the question young minds always arrive at last. Why did you not send for the police? Because, my dear, there was very little crime, Miss Marple said. Not piously, but accurately. There was vanity, and there was tidiness turned tyrant, and there was the temptation to make mercy theatrical. The law does not like such things. It prefers blood. Villages, however, are killed far more often by lists than by knives. One cures lists with daylight, and one cures vanity with work. The police would have muddled both and liked themselves for it. Violet let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. I have been given the linen cupboard, she said. It appears to be an empress among cupboards. Polly now counts pillow slips, as if they were sins, and is too tired to be romantic at day's end. Percy, that smells of starch, imagine. Excellent, said Miss Marple. Starch supports without showing. Lady Bantry took the floor again, as floors often do in her presence. And the tins? In a week, Miss Marple said. You will find that most of them have walked home. Those that do not have no owner left, or a story best put in the vicar's ear. The parish will enjoy being shocked in private. She set down her cup and looked at them all with the clear blue gaze that had unnerved more small corruptions than most sermons. Do you see? It was never about hatches. It was about the uses people make of being necessary. Violet mistook necessity for importance and tried to borrow it from sympathy. Mr. Tom's mistook necessity for power and tried to rent it out. The house, poor innocent, learned to perform. One must teach houses and people to be useful without drama. There followed that dear harmony, which comes when decent people have been corrected in time, amusement, a little shame, a resolution to keep both. They ate buns as if they had been absolved. Archer offered, with touching gravity, to repair Miss Marple's garden gate. She accepted as if she had merely Been waiting for him to think of it. Dr. Haydock promised to bring more of the soap that smells like honesty, and Violet undertook to teach the new clerk, when the parish chose him, how not to make minutes into ledgers of the soul. Iris tucked away a sentence she would not print and would remember. Only as they were going, with that dilatory speed departures have when they have been happy, did Lady Bantry turn back with the true last question. "Jane, how did you know the seventh step would not have a second career?" "You trusted a house. I trusted a woman," Miss Marple said. Violet had rehearsed nearly falling because she wished to be seen and excused for what she is always obliged to be: dependable. The moment she was seen, quite seen, she did not need the step. People do not trip when they have somewhere to stand. And I trusted another thing, that the person who turns kindness into ransom always leaves a line for the next name. Mr. Tom's had begun yours, Violet. Men like that do not stop. They are stopped. They went then, and the cottage became itself again, which is to say it seemed to have been expecting its own quiet. Miss Marple tidied cups, put the rose-pink thread back with common string, and counted, without counting, the small economies of human nature. In the garden, a cat stepped through a square of sunlight as if it had been laid for it. The watering can was at a sensible level. The village breathed in as rooms do, and let the breath go without needing a cue. Later, when evening made the hedges confessional, Miss Marple sat by her window with plain knitting, and thought once, but only once, of the little recess at Gossington and the tins behind the tins. Cupboards will always be asked to keep what people cannot quite bear to own. The trick, she set her needles and smiled, is to teach them to keep only linen. The rest, if one has eyes and patience, will always find its proper shelf, not under the stairs, but in the understanding that forgives without a list and notices without a fuss.